So we're going to be talking about a campaign that's going to launch, an ad that's going to launch shortly around milk and consumption of milk. I suppose you could make a case in point if I've understood the ad correctly, encouraging people to use different type of milk. So Elizabeth Davenport, who is the campaign manager of Animal Ads, is going to come to the show and Aidan going to give us more of an insight into the actual campaign, what it involves. So, Elizabeth, welcome to the show. Got you on board. Tell us a bit more about the ad, please.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having us on, Jimmy. So as you mentioned, we have a new campaign launching. It's the first time that Animal Aid have done a TV advert, so it's very exciting for us. And the ad is really geared towards kind of showing the side of dairy farming that most people will not have seen before. I think, kind of listeners will be very familiar with the very idyllic scenes of, happy cows in the gorgeous, lush green pastures, and quite fairy tale-esque childhood imagery of milking parlours and all the like. So what our ad does is actually kind of really show the truth, actually, and that that's really not what it's like at all. And obviously, with the aim of the ad is to kind of encourage people to rethink their choices, and potentially move towards ditching dairy altogether.
No, I take your point there, but what do people enjoy dairy? I mean, what's the solution? If I mean, I've got to admit, Elizabeth, now I don't drink milk because mainly because I'm trying to bring my cholesterol down. I've tried various milk, different types of milk, and honestly, they taste horrible. I've tried every milk I can think of. If you want to call it, treat myself to hot chocolate, to a coffee, or I love a nice cup of tea with milk every now and again. I'll do it with
Yeah.
milk because the alternatives for me just taste horrific, really. I'd rather have no milk at all. And I mean, I do it, and I'm honest about it. You know, I,
Yeah.
I do it because basically it's a cholesterol thing for me. I believe it's one way to sort of try and bring it down.
Yeah,
Also, I don't eat meat
absolutely.
anymore. Yeah, and I don't. The reason I don't eat meat is not for any sort of virtuous reasons. Basically, I just went off it really, the texture, the taste. But I can appreciate that people do like it. I mean, what's the sort of if someone does enjoy a nice cup of tea with milk or a coffee, and what are the alternatives? I mean, what can they do? I mean, what's the campaign aiming to do to sort of encourage people to you've mentioned there basically the idea we've got about animal farming and so on and so forth, but what else can encourage people? I mean, different people are going
Yeah.
to have different thoughts on that themselves, so what's your
Yeah.
take on?
Yeah, of course. So I think the point you mentioned about taste and kind of treating ourselves to things like hot chocolates and coffee, and I think cheese is obviously one that people kind of say, "Oh, I could never give it up." It's a really good point, but you know, I think I think we're at a stage now in society where we should be really questioning whether a fleeting moment of pleasure, you kind of treating ourselves to a 10-minute hot chocolate, is worth the suffering of the entire life cycle of an animal suffering, uh, really being bred into an existence that is nothing but suffering and deprivation and confinement, all so that we can kind of enjoy a hot chocolate or some cheese and crackers kind of thing. To that point, we do know that milk consumption in the UK is declining, and it has been declining steadily for a few decades now, actually. So I think as a society, people want options that are more compassionate, and they want to move towards a kinder society. Um, and kind of, I suppose, on that point, the alternatives, there are so many. I know you might not have had a great experience with many of them, but there's so many choices out there now that are importantly accessible and affordable for people. There really isn't any need to continue relying on, uh, you know, dairy products and animal products in general. So yeah, so I would just encourage people to kind of be open-minded, and to shop around and see what works for you. Not all of the alternatives will work for everybody, of course not. Um, but I think, in terms of the animal suffering, it's worth it, because I just don't think that we can justify kind of, the level of suffering that we see and that we show in our adverts in our new campaign. just for the sake of, a treat
Yeah.
or, yeah.
So your campaign is going to show the flip side to what we're kind of um,
Yeah.
believe in terms of the animals, sort of, and the flip side is going to be like another reality in terms of the way milk is produced. Am I correct in sort of saying that?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I wouldn't say it's another alternative, another reality, sorry. What it is it's just the reality.
Yeah.
So, the vast majority of dairy cows in the UK, they are not out on green pastures. I think people will be very surprised to learn that they are actually housed indoors. So they're in these big barns that are kind of like concrete cubicles almost that are like wide enough for one cow to sleep in. They're very barren. They're often very dirty. They're often dark with no lights or windows, etc. So, I think people will be really shocked to learn that. And of course, the footage used in our advert that shows those conditions, it's all been shot in the UK. It's all been taken in the UK. So it's very indicative of, the reality of dairy farming. Um, and another big focus of our advert is the separation of cows and calves. So, and the reason that we've chosen to focus on that is because one argument that we do often get from people is, I only drink organic milk or I only eat, free range products. But sadly, the reality of dairy farming is that, no dairy product would exist without that the separation of the mother and the calf, which is incredibly distressing and traumatic. And the calves go on to experience all kinds of, isolation and things that probably won't talk about on daytime radio. But yes, so these kinds of experiences of the animals are, they're systemic across the industry, and that's really what our ad is trying to get across to people.
Yeah, no, and I can appreciate that, Elizabeth, and I can appreciate what the ad's trying to get across, and I'm just looking at things sort of from both sides,
Yeah, of course.
objectively. Like I said before, I personally don't eat and haven't done. I've started eating salmon again now for omega three. I just decided many years ago not to eat meat for the simple reason that just it never really agrees with me. I don't. I'm not a big fan of it anyway, to be fair. But it wasn't done. I don't want to sort of like try and take any moral high ground
Yeah,
here. It was done for
sure.
that. It was done purely just didn't like it. But I do start eating salmon again type thing. Wild caught salmon. Do a bit of my own research here and there and speak to nutrition people, the omega free. But the thing is, there'll be a lot of people like watching the ad type thing, and a lot of people watching the ad and everything else. To be fair, who are sort of struggling financially. They enjoy eating meat. Meat's a big part of their diet. Provides them with the B12. Some people. I don't want to pretend to be a nutritionist, but the iron and other stuff that and they're going to be thinking, okay, you know, cost is a big thing too. I mean,
Mm.
what can I eat that's different, Elizabeth? There's people in the UK, around the world now, pretty much everywhere I've sort of traveled to the last few years is experiencing the financial crisis, but we can only speak for the UK at the moment too, as we're here. They're going to be watching, thinking, okay, well, what alternative can I do? I mean, where do I get the money from to sort of go out there and buy these wonderful alternatives?
Yeah, of
And
course.
some people just enjoy. I don't know. I know you mentioned before like a fleeting glimpse of it, but sometimes it's more than that for some people. Like meeting up for a cuppa, meeting up for a Sunday roast. It's a big deal for some people. It's a family gathering. Really, there's a tradition side to it too. So I think it's deeper than that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. Quite a bit to unpack there. I think just because you mentioned tradition at the end there, I think I don't feel like tradition is a good enough reason to perhaps keep up uh, the level of cruelty involved in farming. I mean, there are many things, many industries that don't exist anymore because they haven't passed that test of, being exploitative and causing immense suffering, and nobody would advocate for those to come back. So I do feel like, one day in the future there will be a moment when we look back on this kind of mass scale of animal suffering and frankly be quite amazed that it continued in the way that it did. I mean, in terms of the cost, I think that's a really important thing to address because I know that a lot of the plant-based meat alternatives, so things like your kind of meat-free sausages and your, I don't know, corn mince and all that kind of stuff, there is a bit of a bit of talk at the moment about how those things are quite expensive. Um, And even coming back to kind of the topic of dairy, you know, things like the oat milks and stuff, I think a lot of people have this conception that they are really expensive and unaffordable for many people. What I would say to that is that, you know, no diet, whether it's vegan or non-vegan, should be relying overly on meat or plant-based meat because all of it is very processed, whether it comes from an animal or elsewhere. It's not the most healthy thing that we can be eating. So in general, we would definitely advocate for vegan diets that are really focused more on whole foods. So your things like your vegetables, obviously your fruits, grains, pulses, things like that, because they are healthier for you, but also they happen to be some of the cheapest options in supermarkets. So there's definitely a big push there for, you know, a less processed diet, you know, whether that is meat or the meat alternatives, you know, kind of treating those as a treat, as you said, and not relying too much on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to admit, I have tried the meat alternatives, and if I
Yeah.
was, it, I'd sooner go back to eating meat, Elizabeth. Honestly, some of the meat alternatives I've tried before, same again. I might be just my taste. I just find them horrible. I can't go anywhere near some of the alternatives. Honest, I've tried them before. Thinking I've even thought to myself, you know what? If I'm going to have this, I may as well just have meat. To be fair, I just don't agree. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of listeners thinking the same thing too, where, not only are they costly too, but you kind of think, well, there is a social element to food as well. People want to sort of sit down and enjoy their food. If you're sort of eating something, you're not enjoying it, then it's not a good thing, really. If you sort of, for me, it's like I have a quota of caffeine I can have during the day type thing, like a lot of people. And I think, well, if I'm going to have something, I'm going to have something I really, really enjoy. If I'm going to go for a bite to eat, money's tight. If I'm going to sort of spend the money and time to go out to eat something, I want to eat something I really, really enjoy. I have things that I enjoy. I do enjoy some of the stuff you mentioned there, the grains, the salads, and that sort of stuff, really. They don't always sort of like, fill you up, to be fair. So, you might use a filler here and there, bit of sourdough bread, whatever. But the reality is, I think that, you know, at, there's a point, I suppose, where people kind of have a lot to take on board, really. I know, and from what I can understand, it's a powerful ad. Do you think the ad in the infinite wisdom is going to have an impact on people in terms of going to think, you know what, um, animal suffering type thing, I'm going to sort of change? Or do you think that, what are your thoughts? How much of an impact do you think that will have?
Well, I mean, I think it will have an impact for sure. Perhaps I'm biased for saying that, but
Yeah.
yes, I do think it will. I think, you know, we're a country that kind of prides ourselves on being animal lovers, and you know, I think that there are lots of people who are just not aware of what animal farming really looks like and what the animals really go through. Um, you know, a kind of big part of putting this campaign together was that we didn't want to focus on the slaughter aspect and the killing of the animals because, you know, everybody knows that slaughterhouses are not nice places and, you know, all the rest of it. But I think a lot of people kind of justify their consumption of meat and dairy by saying that if the animals have enjoyed a good life, then that in some way kind of mitigates, you know, using them, you know, for sustenance and such. So what our ad actually does is really kind of challenge that point of view in that you know these animals are not living good lives and as I mentioned before, I think people will find it quite surprising that dairy cows are housed indoors. You know these barns are essentially kind of battery cages but for cows. Um, and so I think that will shock people. I think also the element of the cow-calf separation, even when we're talking about organic produce and free-range produce, there are certain aspects that kind of, you know, that all cows will endure, regardless of the higher welfare schemes that consumers might be hoping is better, is, you know, a more worthy spend of their hard-earned money. You know, so I do think it will have an impact. I think, you know, again, it's the first time that uh, you know, any kind of animal group has advertised on primetime television as well, like confronting the dairy industry. So I think even that in itself is quite shocking, perhaps, for people.
Yeah, no, I'm sure a lot of people listening in will have seen some of the documentaries of years gone by.
Mm.
I've seen them. You've seen them as well, and plenty of people I know have seen them. And there has been a change. I mean, people are. you've mentioned there. I do speak to people who share similar thoughts to what you've mentioned there, and are concerned about the wealth of animals type thing. And I do also speak to people who think, they've got that sort of image of the animal being in a nice farm with
Yeah,
freedom. And
yeah,
I'm sure it will have an impact, that's for sure. And I think it's been, like, you know, I'm mindful of time, and it's sort of been great speaking to you. It's really, really fascinating, topic. I'm sure you want it to have the impact as
yeah.
well, and I'm sure it will for some people. That's for sure. And on that note, is it something that you think you're going to keep going at, or will it be like the one advert? Will it be a recurring thing?
Yeah, so the adverts are kind of airing on Thursday evening tonight on Channel 4, and they're going out across Sky already, actually. So they're going to run for 4 weeks, so people can catch them for the next 4 weeks. Will definitely be doing more with this ad. I think dairy is very much an industry that benefits from these kind of prevailing myths about needing milk for strong bones and everything like that, and this very picturesque, idyllic countryside scene. So it's definitely something that, there's plenty to unpick and to challenge. So yeah, I hope it will have a really good impact. As I said, the adverts are going out as we speak, and if anybody wants to find any kind of extra information or get involved with the campaign, they can visit animalaid.org.uk.
Brilliant. No, thanks for your time. Well, it was a really
Thank you
interesting
so much,
thing.
Jimmy. Thank you.
And all the best with the advert, and hopefully has the impact that you're aiming for.
Amazing.
Take care.
Thanks so much for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Bye bye. Bye.